Welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Stephanie Martin-Taylor, in for Thuy Vu. On our show, California Secretary of State Alex Padilla talks about why Californians aren't voting. What do changes on the Supreme Court bench mean for some key cases that will affect California? And we get a preview of upcoming arts events around the Bay Area. But first, a tech giant takes on the federal government in a fight over access to cell phone data. On Tuesday, a judge in Southern California ordered Apple to help the FBI unlock an iPhone belonging to Saeed Farook, one of the two terrorists who killed 14 people in San Bernardino in December. Security features on the iPhone have prevented the FBI from searching the device to see if Farook and his wife communicated with other terrorists before the attack. Apple CEO Tim Cook said the company will fight the order. He called it an overreach by the government that could compromise millions of customers' privacy and security. Joining us now is NPR's digital culture correspondent, Laura Seidel. Laura, we're talking about one phone here, but why is Apple saying that unlocking this phone would open this whole Pandora's box that would compromise everybody's right to privacy?
It's a complicated question. What Apple is saying is that in order to unlock this phone, which basically Apple phones have this feature where if you try to guess a password more than 10 times, it erases what's on the phone. What the government wants Apple to do is to help them get rid of that so they can go in and just guess at passwords and get into the phone. Apple would have to build special software in order to do that. Apple's saying once we do that, once we build that key, it will be applicable to lots of other iPhones. And as a result, once you build it, even if you do it in secret at Apple, things get out, you know? I mean, God forbid somebody offers, $10 million to one of the engineers that worked on it or something like that. It gets out. So Apple's saying, if you make us do this, you will make millions of customers less secure. So they're fighting it for that. That's the core of the reason they're fighting it. Secondly, they're also saying it sets a precedent, a legal precedent, that if we say yes to this once, we will have to say yes to this time and time and again, every time the government comes and tries to break into your phone, essentially for, yes, I mean, it has to go through due process to get there, but still, they would have to comply.
Now, it sounds like this battle has been brewing for quite some time. In fact, in New York, the DA said that there are many iPhones sitting in the crime lab that they're unable to crack.
That is true, and Apple has not wanted to help. I should say that previously I should say two things. One is Apple has helped with things like accessing the cloud data that was associated with this phone. They just don't want to break the encryption on the phone itself, though that is something in the past they did. I think the revelations that came forward that Edward Snowden brought to the world about how the U.S. government was working with tech companies made all of the tech companies, Apple, Google, Facebook, a lot more aware of how the public was perceiving them when it came to protecting their information. And so Apple kind of shifted. And with regard to those phones, this is the Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance Jr., has talked about these phones, but he has not pointed out how it has actually thwarted an investigation not to get whatever is on those phones. So that's, I think, another important point here. We don't know if whatever's on those phones would be helpful or not.
Now, I was reading that police are often very happy to find a cell phone on a crime scene, so they are used to getting information from phones. What kinds of information did they used to get from phones that weren't this type of iPhone?
Well, I mean, think about it, what we do on our phones. In fact, in 2014, the Supreme Court held in Kelly versus California, they actually found that phones today are not the same as phones used to be. They saw that what we have on a phone now is where we are, our health information, banking. I mean, if you want to find out a lot about someone, if you've got, I'm like a cyborg, I carry my phone around with me everywhere, and it can tell you where I've been. It can tell you how many paces I've walked. So that's why it's a treasure trove.
Ultimately, what's at stake for other tech companies?
I think the same thing as to whether the government can force them to break their own encryption. And I think an important point here is what Apple is saying, we sold this phone, we created this stuff, but it's not our problem anymore. And to some degree, Apple does not want to be the third party in here. They're like, government, do what you want with that phone, but don't call us in. And I think the tech companies are kind of trying to say, hands off here. I think for Apple in particular, an important point here is I think Tim Cook is laying down the gauntlet on privacy and saying, my company is about privacy. And this is as much about positioning Apple as a company that consumers feel safe with as it is about defying the U.S. government.
Now, Apple is one of the wealthiest companies in the world. Were we talking about another company, another phone maker, would they even be able to take this stance?
Oh, that's always a hard question. Certainly it is much harder for anybody to fight a legal fight if you don't have the money and the resources. So yes, it would probably be harder in that respect. But some people might do it, some people might not. Hard to say.
How likely is it that Congress will get involved?
Well, I just before I got here, saw that there was a subcommittee in Congress that wants Tim Cook to come talk to them. And so I think, given how high profile, even Donald Trump is weighing in on this, saying he's going to boycott Apple products. I think you're going to see Congress probably try and weigh in, but let's be realistic. We have a Congress that doesn't do much these days. So even if they try and weigh in, will they do anything? Hard to say.
You've been on a lot of media outlets today talking about this. This is a really big story.
I think it's a huge story, and I think it's really important. We are living in a world in which the technology is shifting a lot of issues. In the past, if, say, Brinks made a safe, or they wanted to break down a door, they break down that one door. They didn't have to go and ask for a key that would open a million other doors, right? So I think this makes it extremely important, plus the fact that so much information is on our phones. And so we've never had a device quite like this. So we need to decide, how important is it to let the government in?
Laura Seidel, thank you.
You're welcome.
The public paid its respects to Justice Antonin Scalia at the Supreme Court today, ahead of his funeral this weekend. A political battle is brewing over who will replace him. During a visit to California this week, President Obama acknowledged the difficulties of getting a nomination past Republican senators.
There are a lot of Republican senators who are going to be under a lot of pressure from various special interests and various constituencies and many of their voters to not let any nominee go through, no matter who I nominate.
There are also questions about how Scalia's death will affect the cases pending before the High Court. We're joined now by Rory Little, professor of law at UC Hastings. Professor Little, President Obama says he will make a nomination. If that's true, do you think that will happen?
Well, I think he'll nominate somebody, and I think the nomination will come pretty quickly so that the Republicans have no objection based on timing. And I think the Republicans will be pressured to have a hearing. Will that result in confirmation? Probably not. We certainly don't know at this point.
In the meantime, we're mid-session and many cases are looming. The California Teachers Association is involved in one of them. What is that case about?
That case is about whether the Public Employees Union can require everyone covered by the bargaining unit to pay, even though they don't want to pay to join the union, even though they may not agree with all the union's positions. And it goes back 40 years to an old case called Abood. The question is, will that be overruled? And Justice Scalia's absence could make a big difference on that one, because most people think it was internally 5-4 and about to be decided. That 5-justice majority now disappears, and if it's 4-4, it's affirmed the lower court decision, which was in favor of the union.
What does that case mean for unions in general?
Well, so first, it's public employee unions. Would it extend to private unions is a much bigger question. It would mean that they would get less money from people that they bargained for. And what the effect of that would be on unions, would that reduce their power? Would that reduce their ability to negotiate? Remains to be seen. The unions, of course, are very unhappy with the idea of losing a certain percentage. The federal government doesn't unionize, doesn't require unionized employees, and they only have about a 30% membership rate. So a reduction from 100% to 30% would be a significant financial problem.
Are there other cases Californians in particular should be watching?
You know, this term doesn't have a lot of California-based cases on it that Justice Scalia will make a difference in, but there are issues we all care about. The abortion case, a religious freedom contraception case, a redistricting case. All of these cases could go 4-4 when we thought they might be 5-4. And then the lower court decision is affirmed, whichever way it came out. So this might be good or bad, depending on what your view is.
When was the last time we saw a major shift on the court in terms of ideology?
Well, that's a very good question. So a lot of people see the appointment of Clarence Thomas as having really shifted things because he replaced Thurgood Marshall, one of the most liberal justices in the court's history, for one of the most conservative. So that's a big shift. It depends how many. I mean, if you have more than one, Richard Nixon totally transformed the court when he got to appoint 4 justices in about 2.5 years.
Who do you think President Obama will nominate? $1 million question.
$1 million question. Well, he's got to nominate somebody who's willing to take it because the nominee may not be confirmed. A lot of people are betting on Loretta Lynch, the first African-American to serve as our Attorney General. She would be of a benefit to the Democrats, I think, whether she's confirmed or not. But there's a lot of candidates. President Obama likes to do things that are first. And he's not going to nominate somebody who's an obvious radical leftist because that would be a non-starter.
I want to go back to the issue of the court only having 8 members now. That's not unprecedented, is it?
It's not unprecedented, and every now and then a justice gets sick and is gone for a couple of months, has some surgery, and cases go 4-4. They could also set cases for re-argument if they want to, but they usually don't unless they know when there will be 9 justices. And right now we don't know. It might be in a couple of months. It might not be for over a year. But it happens in the past. You know, the Supreme Court used to only have 5 members on it. It's not always been 9 justices, but it has been for about 150 years.
The idea of re-arguing cases sounds like that adds more to the workload of the current justices. How might that change the whole judicial schedule?
Well, you know, they can set argument whenever they want to, but if they were to set it for re-argument, most likely they would set it for next fall or even next spring. So it doesn't really add to their workload much. It would just be one of their cases. Let's face it, they only do about 70 cases a year. So a lot of lower court judges just laugh and say, what workload? That's not close to what I've got.
Final thoughts?
Well, I think it's a very important historical moment, and it's largely unprecedented. So we're in the middle of making history here.
Rory Little, thank you.
Thank you.
With the June primaries ahead, the Get Out the Vote campaign is in full swing. In California, there are close to 7 million people who are eligible to vote but are not registered, and the majority of them are Latino and Asian American. California Secretary of State Alex Padilla spoke with us about the barriers people face when it comes to voting. Scott Shafer has that interview.
Secretary Padilla, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. So 2014 was not a good year. We had a record low turnout for voters in that gubernatorial year. You got elected that year as well. Why aren't people voting?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons for why people who are eligible to register haven't registered, and for people who are registered voters, haven't turned out to vote. There's studies, there's surveys, there's polls, on this, and it's a combination of factors. For a lot of people, they feel disconnected from government, or there's a lack of trust of what's going on. Does my vote really make a difference? But believe it or not, there's a lot of what I call mechanical reasons for why people don't vote. There's a big part of the voter universe out there that isn't aware that election day is coming up because they're not watching, CNN, and they're not getting all the mailers in the mailbox. Or even if they do know an election's coming up, they may not be paying close enough attention to know where their polling place is, or things of that nature.
Yeah, and I know you're taking some steps to change some of those things, but if you look at the 6 million plus people who are not registered to vote, who are eligible to vote, they're disproportionately Latino and Asian American. How much of that is a language issue, cultural issue? I mean, what are the barriers there specific?
Right, no, I think that's very real. So the estimate is about 6.7 million eligible but unregistered Californians. And you're absolutely right. Disproportionately communities of color, disproportionately younger people, and disproportionately working class families. And so, what are the reasons for that? Here's a quick story that I think captures some of it. For some people, if they're immigrants to this country and new citizens, or their kids, they may not come from a history of participating in democracy, depending on where they come from. They may not come from a life experience of a democratic society. And so in the course of my work, I try to visit as many colleges and high schools in particular and talk to young people about the importance of registering and the importance of voting. And I'll hear a principal or a local mayor talk about, when I was growing up, I went with my parents to the polls, every November to
So they got used to doing that when they were young.
Well, and that's great if that's their experience. That was not my experience. My parents are immigrants to this country. They didn't take me to go vote, not because they didn't want to, but because they weren't eligible. And I can imagine the millions of California children who are growing up without that experience. All the more reason we have to get out there, increase civic education in our schools.
California is the very last state to have a statewide database of voters. What difference is that going to make, and what's the timeline for getting that up and running?
Yeah, well, again, the little bit of bad news, will be the last state in the nation to come into compliance with a federal mandate to have a centralized statewide voter registration database. The good news is we're on track for that to come online this June. And what that will do is not just modernize how we conduct elections in this state, but from a voter perspective, allow you to go on and register to be able to verify the status of your registration. A lot of times when people move, we forget where we registered, or if there's a name change, that can easily be done. Where your polling place is, requesting a vote by mail ballot, or after the fact, verifying that your vote by mail ballot was received and counted. And if not, why not? You could have a signature mismatch issue that you're not aware of after so many years, or same thing with your provisional ballot. So it's going to be very user-friendly and hopefully empowering for voters as well.
And that'll enable us to do this motor voter automatic registration when people go to the DMV, or are those two things related to each other?
Yes, so having the system we call VoteCal in place will enable a lot of the other election modernization and reforms that we've been working on. A lot of people have asked, what about same-day registration? That bill was passed, it was signed into law, but it's contingent upon VoteCal, being in place. And so now we envision that within the year. And same thing with new motor voter. This automated registration through the DMV is contingent upon VoteCal being in place. And so again, we're seeing that come online sooner rather than later.
If you think about it, the way we vote now is still fairly antiquated. You can vote by mail, but we still have polling places all over the state. Oftentimes you go on election day, there's no one there. We can do so many things now on the internet. We do our banking, our medical appointments and records and all that stuff. Why can't we vote online?
Well, I think there's two reasons why voting online isn't in our near future. Number one, most people will guess security, right? We hear about a data breach far too regularly in the news, and what's more at the core of our country and our democracy than the elections. We cannot compromise that. The second reason, equally important, is our privacy. We have a secret ballot in this country to prevent bribery, prevent coercion, and we know the internet's not really built that way. Whenever we hear about a hack, we know what the messages said, we know who sent the messages, from which device, from which account. So it's not in the near future. But that being said, there's a lot of room to embrace technology to afford people more options in when, where, and how to cast a ballot. I'm sponsoring legislation that could bring to California a new vote model where every voter automatically gets their ballot mailed to them, and you have options on how to deliver that ballot. You can mail it back, you can drop it off at a number of ballot drop boxes or drop-off stations throughout the county, but utilizing technology to modernize polling places as we know them today, to turn them into vote centers that afford early voting and the flexibility for voters to vote anywhere in the county.
Is there the money to pay for that? Because counties complain all the time that they're told to do things by the state and there's no money for that.
But we believe there has to be money to pay for that, because the equipment we have today, even without any changes in how we conduct elections, the equipment we have today is at or beyond its life expectancy. We need new equipment no matter what. So my argument is, instead of just buying a brand new iPhone 2, let's look at what technology today enables and invest in something that's much more user-friendly, meaning voter-friendly, while maintaining the security of our elections.
So just quickly looking ahead 5-10 years, how are elections and voting going to be different?
Well, again, what I envision is a model where every voter automatically has a ballot mailed to them, and many people will choose to mail it back. Many people will want to drop it off in person, and for some reason, if you lost it, made a mistake, you need a replacement ballot, you can walk into any vote center in your county not just a polling place closest to where you live. Maybe it's easier to vote closer to where you work, where you drop your kids off at school, by the shopping mall, and being able to have all your questions answered and your custom ballot prepared there really cut down on provisional ballots in the process.
Secretary of State Padilla, thanks so much for coming in. It's going to be a busy year for you.
Thank you, but we'll keep coming back.
All right.
Don't forget to vote.
Okay.
That was KQED's senior politics and government editor Scott Shafer talking with California Secretary of State Alex Padilla. The Bay Area is brimming with arts and entertainment options right now and in the weeks ahead. From a unique jazz meets opera production to an interactive technology-driven art exhibit, there's something for everyone. KQED's senior arts editor Chloe Veltman has picked out some of the highlights, and she joins us now. Chloe, in this political season we're in, it seems really apropos that Berkeley Rep is hosting a production of something that's all about political ambition run amok.
That's right. We're talking about Macbeth here that's happening at Berkeley Repertory Theatre. It's a play about ambition and all sorts of other things. And indeed, it's a really ambitious production for Berkeley Rep to be taking on because it features two really major actors. Frances McDormand, who's an Oscar-winning actress. Most people know her from the role that she played in Fargo. She's also, in my opinion, the best thing in the new Coen Brothers movie, Hail Caesar. Anyway, she's taking on Lady Macbeth, and she's joined by Conleth Hill, who most people know through from Game of Thrones. He plays the eunuch Varys, and he's going to be Macbeth. And the two of them are conniving, and it's one of Shakespeare's most ambitious plays. Now, this production is directed by Daniel Sullivan, who's a really eminent Shakespeare director in this country. He's actually from the Bay Area too, and he's taken his works to Broadway. He, of course, is a very experienced Shakespeare director, and he's working with two actors who don't have so much Shakespeare on their resume, although they have really great theatre chops, West End and Broadway and so on. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Now, moving to a much lighter, much more light-filled art exhibit down in Silicon Valley. Will you take us down to Menlo Park? Yeah,
Menlo Park. That seems like sort of a strange place for a major contemporary art gallery to put a space. But Pace Gallery, which is based out of New York, it's been going since the 60s, and they have spaces in places like Beijing and London, and they chose recently to open a Menlo Park facility. Now, it is the ideal space to be showing art that's related to technology. Here we have an exhibition. It's so beautiful, full of light. And in this particular place, you get to walk through and use an app to manipulate these beautiful lights, these strings of lights. They're like a forest. Yeah.
Who are the artists?
So the artists are Team Lab, and it's a Japanese collective of about 400 artists, designers, engineers based out of Tokyo. And this is their largest exhibition to date.
Why did they think of Menlo Park?
Well, it really is the ideal place for exhibitions that are all about technology. Plus, you know, there's a lot of money there too, and I gather that some of the pieces have sold for quite a bit.
Let's move on to San Francisco, where there is always something happening. You've got something that has a little bit of a mix of jazz and opera, which is an unusual combination.
It is an unusual combination. Now, this is a what's called an opera in jazz, and it's called Champion. And it's a boxing story, actually. It takes its cue from history. It's all about Emil Griffith, famous welterweight boxer, who had a bout in 1962 with Benny Parrott. And what ended up happening with these two was that Griffith killed Parrott in the ring. Now, he didn't intend to kill Parrott, but Parrott had actually made some homophobic remarks at Griffith before the bout began. And Griffith was a bisexual boxer. And I think he just pummeled him in that ring. There's lots of footage on YouTube where you can see what happened. It's fierce. So this is an opera by Terence Blanchard. He's a famous trumpet player, jazz trumpet player, actually. And it's a collaboration between SF Jazz and Opera Parallel, which is a contemporary opera company right here in San Francisco. We'll see that bout and the life of Emil Griffith afterwards, his tormented life, brought into this dramatic retelling.
We also have a rather funny group that's coming into the San Francisco Jewish Community Center, too.
That's right. So there's a really popular podcast right now called Call Your Girlfriend. And it's the work of 3 different people, Anne Friedman and Amina Tussaud, and also Gina Delvac is the producer on that. They're coming to town and they're doing a live podcast recording at the Jewish Community Center. This is a podcast that treats pop culture in a really smart way, puts a feminist slant on it, and they're all going to be in town, these ladies, and there's going to be an audience gathered, and they're going to be covering all sorts of topics. I mean, one of the things that I found that they've done really well are some of these topics to do with weight loss. There's this one in particular about an overweight Barbie that I think is really thoughtful and funny.
And we have a clip of that. Let's take a quick listen.
I was like, if you were brave, you would make a fat Barbie. And then that would be, you know, like that would be representative of a lot of little girls, and they would get to see themselves in Barbie.
I would show up. I would show up for Fat Barbie.
I would buy a Fat Barbie in a heartbeat.
So what is that experience like, being in the audience of a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think a lot of radio shows, podcasts are now going on tour. We've seen Radio Lab live, This American Life live. You know, I think it's really like going to the theatre in some ways. And I think radio producers, podcast producers are getting very good at having conversations on stage and also weaving in interesting sound. So, you know, I mean, this event, unfortunately, it's sold out. But one great thing about it, too, is that you'd actually even have to be at the JCC to experience it, because there's a live feed, so you can just go online and see the action, which is pretty great.
Finally, Chloe, there are some kids in Oakland who have won the lottery, it sounds like, when it comes to opportunities to perform.
Yeah, this is a delightful story. So the Oakland School for the Arts has been selected out of I don't know how many different youth organisations to basically be the first organisation to get the amateur rights to perform the hit musical School of Rock. Many people know this from the there's a Jack Black movie of a few years ago. It's been made into a musical. Andrew Lloyd Webber, you know, the famous composer of Phantom of the Opera and Cats and other things, is behind it. So we've got the Oakland School for the Arts. They're going to get to perform at Carol Shorenstein Hayes' behest. She's a big producer here in town at the Curran Theatre. It's this beautiful historic theatre right in San Francisco, normally used for these big splashy Broadway shows. The kids are going to get to put on their production of School of Rock, and this is the kicker, Andrew Lloyd Webber himself is coming to town, and I gather he's turning up at the kids' dress rehearsal on March the 2nd.
Wow, after all these years, he's still really involved in his productions.
Yeah, well, the thing is, he really cares about arts education.
Well, Chloe Veltman, thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
All right. That's it for tonight. I'm Stephanie Martin-Taylor. Thanks for watching. For more of KQED's arts coverage, please go to kqed.org/arts.